All those who have sought dictatorial control over modern nations have understood the necessity of a central bank. When the League of Just Men hired a hack revolutionary named Karl Marx to write a blueprint for conquest called the Communist Manifesto, the fifth plank read, "Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly." Lenin later said that the establishment of a central bank was 90% of communizing a country. Such conspirators knew that you cannot take control of a nation without military force unless the nation has a central bank through which you can control its economy. The anarchist Bakunin sarcastically remarked about the followers of Karl Marx, "They have one foot in the bank and one foot in the socialist movement." The international financiers set up their own front man in charge of each of Europe's central banks. Professor Quigley reports, "It must not be felt that those heads of the world's chief central banks were themselves substantive powers in world finance. They were not. Rather, they were the technicians and agents of the dominant and investment bankers of their own countries, who had raised them up and were perfectly capable of throwing them down. The substantive financial powers of the world were in the hands of these investment bankers, also called international or merchant bankers, who remained largely behind the scenes in their own unincorporated private banks. These formed a system of international cooperation and national dominance, which was more private and more powerful and more secret than that of their agents in the central banks." Dr. Quigley also reveals that the international bankers who owned and controlled the banks of England and France maintained their power even after those banks were theoretically socialized. Naturally, those who controlled the central banks of Europe were eager from the start to fasten a similar establishment on the United States. From the earliest days, the Founding Fathers have been conscious of attempts to control America through money manipulation, and they carried on a running battle with the international bankers. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote to John Adams, "I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies." But even though America did not have a central bank, after President Jackson abolished it in 1836, the European financiers and their American agents managed to obtain a great deal of control over our monetary system. Gustavus Myers, in his History of the American Fortune, reveals, "Under the surface, the Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that there were powers in the old Bank of the United States, abolished by Andrew Jackson. During the 19th century, the leading financiers of the metropolitan East often cut one another's financial throats, but their western and rural victims started to organize politically. The robber barons saw that they had a community of interest towards which they must work together to protect themselves from the thousands of irate farmers and up-and-coming competitors. This diffusion of economic power was one of the main factors stimulating the demands for a central bank by would-be business and financial monopolists. In the Years of Plunder, Proctor Hansel writes of this era. Among the Morgans, Kuhn-Loebs, and other similar pillars of the industrial order, there was less disposition to become involved in disagreements that led to financial dislocation. A community of interest came into being with results that were highly beneficial. But aside from the major Eastern centers, most of the American bankers and their customers still distrusted the whole concept. In order to show the hinterlands that they were going to need a central banking system, the international bankers created a series of panics as a demonstration of their power, a warning of what would happen unless the rest of the bankers got into line. The man in charge of conducting these lessons was J. Pierpont Morgan, American-born but educated in England and Germany. Morgan is referred to by many, including Congressman Louise McFadden, a banker who for 10 years headed the House Banking and Currency Committee, as the top American agent of the English Rothschilds. By the turn of the century, J.P. Morgan was already an old hand at creating artificial panics. Such affairs were well coordinated. Senator Robert Owen, a co-author of the Federal Reserve Act, who later deeply regretted his role, testified before a congressional committee that the bank he owned received from the National Bankers Association what came to be known as the Panic Circular of 1893. It stated, "You will at once retire 1/3 of your circulation and call in 1/2 of your loans." Historian Frederick Lewis Allen tells in Life magazine of April 28, 1949, of Morgan's role in spreading rumors about the insolvency of the Knickerbocker Bank and the Trust Company of America, which rumors triggered the 1907 panic. In answer to the question, did Morgan precipitate the panic, Allen reports, Oakley Thorne, the president of the particular trust committee, testified later before a congressional committee that his bank had been subjected to only moderate withdrawals, and he had not applied for help, and that it was the Morgan sore point statement alone that caused the run on his bank. From this testimony, plus the disciplinary measures taken by the clearinghouse against the Hines, Morris, and Thomas banks, plus other fragments supposedly pertinent evidence, certain chroniclers have arrived at the ingenious conclusion that the Morgan interests took advantage of the unsettled conditions during the autumn of 1907 to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed so that it would kill off rival banks and consolidate the preeminence of the banks within the Morgan orbit.
One really smart family.
Connected to a few other smart.
Yes.
The panic which Morgan had created, he proceeded to end almost single-handedly. He had made his point. Frederick Allen explains, "The lesson of the panic of 1907 was clear, though not for some 6 years was it destined to be embodied in legislation. The United States gravely needed the central banking system. The man who was to play the most significant part in providing America with that central bank was Paul Warburg, who, along with his brother Felix, had immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1902. See Chart 4. They left brother Max, later a major financier of the Russian Revolution, at home in Frankfurt to run the family bank, N.M. Warburg and Company. Paul Warburg married Nina Loeb, daughter of Solomon Loeb of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, America's most powerful international banking firm. Brother Felix married Frieda Schiff, daughter of the Jacob Schiff, the ruling power behind Kuhn Loeb. Stephen Birmingham writes in his authoritative Our Crowd, in the 18th century, the Schiffs and Rothschilds shared a double house in Frankfurt. Schiff reportedly bought his partnership in Kuhn Loeb with Rothschild money. Both Paul and Felix Warburg became partners in Kuhn Loeb and Company. In 1907, the year of the Morgan precipitated panic, Paul Warburg began spending almost all of his time writing and lecturing on the need for bank reform. Kuhn Loeb and Company was sufficiently public-spirited about the matter to keep him on salary at $500,000 per year, while for the next 6 years he donated his time to the public good, working with Warburg in promoting this banking reform. Was Nelson Aldrich known? Working with Warburg in promoting this banking reform was Nelson Aldrich, known as Morgan's floor broker in the Senate. Aldrich's daughter, Abby, married John D. Rockefeller, Jr., the current governor of New York is named for his maternal grandfather. After the Panic of 1907, Aldrich was appointed by the Senate to head the National Monetary Commission, although he had no technical knowledge of banking. Aldrich and his entourage spent nearly 2 years and $300,000 of the taxpayers' money being wined and dined by the owners of Europe's central banks as they toured the continent studying central banking. When the commission returned from its luxurious junket, it held no meetings and made no report for almost 2 years. But Senator Aldrich was busy arranging things together with Paul Warburg and other international bankers. He staged one of the most important secret meetings in the history of the United States. Rockefeller agent Frank Vanderlip admitted many years later in his memoirs. Despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive, as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. Dun, dun, dun.